Hi, everyone. Welcome to MRC Virtual. Today's topic I am super excited to share because we did a little bit of chatting about this in Vegas this past year. Today's topic for this session is what you can do with 1 million humans that you control. I know it's fascinating, but this one's going to be very interesting. I have a panel that we have assembled from across the industry who are coming in today to talk about bots. And if you don't know anything about bots, welcome to this session. If you think you don't have bots trying to get at your merchandise or your payment processes, that's not true. You do, you may just not have recognized it yet. So we're going to have a pretty lively discussion about what we're seeing in bots. So before we get started on that, I want to give you a couple housekeeping announcements. We will have our panelists available today. So I invite you to use the chat feature and ask us any sort of questions you have about bots. We will do our best to answer it. And if we can't, we'll look at getting back to you. Please don't wait to the end. Feel free if we're saying anything in today's discussion that piques your interest, go right ahead into the chat and just start asking questions. We also want to make sure that we invite you to fill out any survey responses that come up at the end. That's how we know which panels to present and which sessions we should probably do a part 2 on. So with that, we're going to get right into it today. So over the past couple years, and especially actually with COVID, there has been a crazy, what we'll call entrepreneurial fraud attack vector using bots. If you can think about something that is a way to attack your site, your payment, to place orders repetitiously, to try to subvert your controls, I guarantee you people are using bots to do that today. And people might say, well, what's the harm? That's a whole lot of fictitious traffic that's attacking your top line. And impacting the customer experience of the customers that you absolutely want to have. And in some cases, we might hear a little bit today about how bots aren't only used by the bad guys too. So with that, I'm going to get us started right into introductions. I'm going to call on each panelist and they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to get right into it. So today I am going to start with Diana. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Gaich-Fishich, and I run e-commerce risk operations for JD Sports North America, Finish Line. I've been in fraud for a very long time, and it is absolutely exciting to be here with everyone today.
Okay, perfect. And Angel?
I'm Angel Grant. I'm VP of Security over at F5 Security. I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 2 decades now, engaging with all types of industries and seeing common patterns of fraud that have emerged over the course of the time. So I'm looking forward to talking with everyone today about them.
Perfect. All right, Darren?
Hi, everyone. Darren Mignault. I am Director of Account Management at Riskified. Been in the fraud space for just these past 5 years and had the honor and opportunity to work with Diana and Finish Line for basically all that time at Riskified. And that's it.
I don't know, 5 years might be a long time. It might feel like a long time.
It feels long, yeah.
All right. Gavin, let's go to you.
Thanks, Tracy. Gavin Hill. I'm at Human Security, and I'm the VP of Threat Intelligence. I've been in cybersecurity for a couple of decades now. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to jump us right into level setting what's going on with bots that we're seeing today. So I'm going to start with Angel. Why don't you give us an idea of what are you seeing as common attack vectors that these bots are using in the e-commerce world?
Yeah, I really like how you set the stage for the panel, where the evolution, particularly over during the pandemic, on the different techniques that were happening. We're definitely seeing the automated attacks continue to evolve, easily bypassing some of the basic security measures that organizations have put in place. It's pretty easy to do that based on the ROI for cybercrime these days. Is pretty straightforward, where they can purchase pretty much anything from the Cybercrime Underground go into forums like Genesis, where they can buy stolen credentials and use tools like Sentry MBA to do credential stuffing, and they can fake browsers, cookies, etc. And we're seeing the attacks vary in sophistication, to counter some of the countermeasures that we have in place, using automations that leverages bot to actually scan for app vulnerabilities, credential stuffing attacks that use those stolen credentials that they easily can buy in the cybercrime underground, because everyone uses the same username password combo. We're seeing a lot of imitation attacks that employ tools to emulate that human behavior to bypass some of the defenses. We're seeing manual attacks using things like click farms to bypass some of the basic like capture techniques, to bypass those types of defenses. Two things that we've seen. One is kind of like the combo type of attack during the pandemic. We saw a lot of organizations being targeted online to blend that card present, card not present attack. They'd do a rapid purchase of online items and then send their mules that they had to repurpose to go pick up at the actual physical store. So that's one area we saw a pretty big spike in. And the other area we saw a pretty big spike in is loyalty point fraud. Majority of people didn't really pay attention to their loyalty points because a lot of people weren't traveling during that time. So as people are starting to travel again, they're realizing how many of their loyalty points have been scammed, whereas 45% of most loyalty points aren't even being used or paid attention to. And so now people are realizing that cyber criminals found that as an easy tool to monetize and go after, as they're targeting all the different merchant loyalty programs.
Perfect. I feel like we could spend a whole hour talking about just this.
Just
All right,
yeah.
just this. Okay, so Darren, what are you guys seeing in terms of, the current emerging threats or the consistent threats that might be going on?
Yeah, like Angel said, the threats that we see are specifically from fraudsters are getting more and more sophisticated. We see them in the classic fraud cases of stolen credentials, credential stuffing, card testing. We're seeing bots employed with account takeover attacks. Organized fraud rings are using bots. But we are seeing it now morph into this realm of policy abuse. So not just credit card and payment fraud, but moving more into policy abuse, using bot technology to get around merchants' defenses and really take advantage in a really big way. It's such a growing cost to merchants these days.
It really is. I mean, there's a ton of cost that these entrepreneurial fraudsters are taking from me. It's very upsetting. Gavin, do you see anything different or more of the same from some of the things that were just mentioned?
More of the same with one little nuance. So if you look at cyber criminals, they do run a business and they all are about making profit as well and scaling their operations, and they do use bots for that. In fact, in a study published by LexisNexis last year, it was found that 77% of all attacks, internet-based attacks, were automated in some way, shape, or form by bots. And one observation that we noticed this year, in fact, is, I think everybody's quite familiar with Log4j. An observation that we had in watching botnet activity is this. It's not so much of a new term, but it's definitely increasing, and that's with regard to kind of like credential stuffing, but it's more exploit stuffing, where adversaries are utilizing bots instead of you doing the reconnaissance phase of which systems are vulnerable to exploits and then taking advantage of that. Now they're just using bots to, I'll use the word, spray and pray the exploits and see what sticks. And as a result, then whichever systems are vulnerable, Log4j in this case, we noticed a massive bot spike where systems were being owned and now being used for crypto mining. So that's one observation we have noticed in the last couple of years, where the concept of exploit stuffing is very much increasing, and that's what adversaries are using for.
Okay, I'd like to say cool, but it's not so cool. I mean, it kind of is sexy, I'm not gonna lie. I think some of these exploits are fascinating. I just don't like that they're coming after our stuff. So to take that transition, since we've heard about some of the common exploits that we've heard about, let's go to Diana, who for the finish line can actually bring it home and talk a little bit about what some of these entrepreneurs might be doing from a merchant standpoint, what the merchant sees.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo what everyone else said. They are getting more sophisticated, but downstream they are getting very creative too. And it's not just purchasing bots, which is commonly known as the sneaker bot. You're right. You mentioned account takeovers, credential stuffing, loyalty points. So I think we are now seeing them everywhere, and that kind of requires different approach from us. So it's no longer just credit card fraud, transactional fraud. I think it's extremely important to actually look at the whole life cycle of that transaction and try to identify any risk gaps within that life cycle of transaction, understand where they could be plugged in, where they can exploit you, your policies, and try to close that gap. From my point of view, I am more looking at these bots as a policy abuse because honestly, I don't know anything about how to detect bots at the front end, but I do know how they look like when it comes down to transaction, when it comes down to login, and we try to see what type of policies they're violating and how can we mitigate those risks.
All right, perfect. So Diana, let's stay with you, and then we'll work a little bit backwards through the group. I one of the things that I loved about chatting with you all back in March was some of the things that I learned, and I had always known that sneakers had their own kind of status, we'll call it in the industry. But let's shift a little bit into customer experience, and why don't you share with us some of the ways that you're seeing bots impact your customer base?
Well, as you know, in sneakers business, we have these release of limited sneakers, and of course, during those times, we want to make sure that our loyal and good customers do get access to these shoes, and we want to make sure that we protect the brand name, we protect our loyal customers, and we protect ourselves as well. So the difficulty that bots created is that they would first, there is huge instability to infrastructure when you have millions and millions of bots hitting you during that specific time of the new product release. And then you have bots purchasing such a high quantity of items in such a short period of time that our good customers cannot access to it. So I think that the one thing that most of the merchants do not always take into consideration is this reputational loss that it creates. Because if this customer cannot purchase it from me, of course they're going to move on. And we're in a world where we are competitive with other retailers out there, and we want to make sure that we keep that customer. So it was extremely difficult for us to make sure that we enable our good customer to access that product instead of going on the marketplace sites and buying it at 10 times the price. So it was difficult to find a solution to help us provide this good customer experience, stop the bots, and also give that stability to our infrastructure at the same time. I think something you mentioned earlier when in the introduction, you said how our good customers impacted. We have good customers turning bad, not necessarily bad, but it's just there's that want or need to buy a product, and then they revert to using bots to get the product. But what happened at that point, most of these customers are not really good bot users. They're probably like me. I wouldn't know how to use it either. Um, and then they end up buying what they didn't want to. Instead of buying one, they buy 101, and then they file chargeback on 100, or they we cancel them, and then they complain about pre-authorization on their credit card. So there are a lot of levels of experience impact that, of course, creates whole other problems called customer service, again, reputation, and so on. So there were a lot of things that were happening downstream that maybe you wouldn't see when you're just looking at that login point or at that transaction.
Perfect. So Darren, I mean, since you have some familiarity, is there anything that you might want to add to what Diana's saying? Other than they're doing an amazing job, I'm sure that's what you want to say, right? Right? Go ahead.
I'll let Diana say, yeah, no, Diana knows. But this is something that we look at as a business problem, right? And if the business has a policy that they want as many good customers who are trusted to get a pair of high demand shoes when there's very low inventory, there needs to be a way to enable that. And Diana, alluded to it, but we see good customers using bots because they have to. In order to get in and just have a chance online to get one pair of shoes, they have to employ a bot that is quicker than a human can be, right? So the business problem that we need to solve is how do we identify from all the bot users which bot users are trusted shoppers and which are not. So that's the challenge that I think merchants have to make. It's not just blocking bots during releases or during high sales. It's really about identifying good users, and in doing that, you prevent the majority of the abusive bots. And there's also kind of this experience that I think the customers have online shopping that's different than the experience those same users had in store. When there were reservations, or you line up outside for the iPhone to be released, or for sneakers to come on Saturday, you're standing in line and you know it's fair. If you're in line behind 100 other people and they only have 100 shoes, okay, you weren't in line early enough, and that's fair. You know it's working the way it's supposed to. With the online shopping experience as it is today, especially with all the bots and how good customers kind of lose more often than not, there's a sense of unfairness that's based in truth, and that's associated with your brand. So you really need to have control over that.
Yeah, that's super true. Perception, I mean, brands are built on perception and psychology, and so definitely you have to protect that. All right, so Angel, how about from your aspect? What are you seeing or hearing from the customer experience that you guys are dealing with?
Yeah, talking about bots is always fascinating because I've worked in so many different domains in the cybersecurity space, but this one's always fascinating to me because of the conversations I have with my customers. Where I love this quote one of my customers said to me, like, Angel, bottom line is bot management is cost management, and that has both quantitative and qualitative pieces to that when it comes with talking about his customers. And so, for example, like when we got into a conversation about qualitative, the examples he gave me were, think CIA triad in the cybersecurity space: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So he brought up, hey, you know what? Bots impact my application performance. That means, customers can't get to my site when I need to. But it also impacts my infrastructure costs because I could be over investing in infrastructure I don't need because it's wasted, and it's really because of bot traffic, not real customer traffic. And the app availability is causing loss of revenue, reputational damage. We talked about that, customer churn. It also impacts potential SLAs that you might have with the third-party ecosystem that you have integrated within your application for online checkout or your payments app or different things like that. It can also impact wrong business decisions. Where you're investing in from a marketing perspective. Are you optimizing for SEO? How do you provide the coupons to your customers? All of those things you don't really think about. Even inventory management, and even customer support costs. For example, we work with Forrester to do a TI report, a total economic impact report on when somebody applies a bot solution into their environment. What does that look like? And one of the interesting things was the customer support costs that came out of that. And how does that experience mean? Like, you got locked out when you're trying to log in, or you forgot your password, you're calling in. By actually deploying a bot mitigation type of tool, you can reduce 88% of your calls to the call center. Simple things like that you don't even think about from a customer experience mean a lot from a qualitative perspective. And we talked about some of the quantitative things of overarching brand reputation, customer experience, and even employee experience and frustration of the amount of hours they're spending investigating cases and trying to figure out what the situation is. Is it a bot attack or is it a DDoS attack? Trying to understand that. So those are the types of things, both at the quantitative and qualitative perspective, that merchants should really be thinking about. And that kind of sums up kind of like that bot management is cost management, but it also leads to customer satisfaction.
Perfect. All right, and then Gavin, to round us out on the customer experience component, I love talking to your guys because they always have fascinating stories. But do you have any particular customer experience? I don't know.
do.
at the tabs. You do? You have a few maybe? Do you want to share one?
Couple, but just to maybe expand on that, if you look also customer experience, everybody's on, I shouldn't say everybody, but the majority of organizations have or are on this digital transformation initiative, right? On how do you get closer to the customer, and ultimately getting closer to the customer is how do you make that customer experience better? How do you better serve those customer needs? Just to expand a little bit on what Angel was talking about is, if you look at digital transformation, it really, when you boil it down, it comes out to, you know, what does your data look like? Is it poisoned? And by poisoned is how well do you know your customers? Bots absolutely do fake likes, fake clicks, fake form fills, etc. And if your marketing team is spending a whole lot of their budget marketing to, frankly, not your customer, the wrong audience, well, that's a whole lot of budget that you've wasted. So from a cost management perspective, that impacts the organization. The other areas is from an infrastructure perspective. In one example, and this very much falls in the customer experience bucket, we worked with an organization where their competitor was doing price scraping on their respective website. And not only were they losing customers because their competitor was giving better pricing, but their infrastructure teams were having to support the respective bots and handling that load. And in the analysis that we did, we found that 70% of the load that the infrastructure team was having to support and pay for cloud infrastructure resources was actually bot. The resultant factor was, once we reduced just 1% cost savings in that 1% of 70% traffic, resulted in about $250,000 in savings to the company per year. So multiply 250K by 70, and it's a big number. The other area then is, you know, from a customer experience perspective, so your customer engagement. A lot of organizations stand up, I think we've all had to solve the puzzle of clicking the fire hydrants on the capture, or the cats, or I am a human, I'm not a robot.
You mean the IQ test I fail all the time? Yes, exactly, Gavin.
Clicking that, and it creates friction for your customers. In research that we conducted, we found that 40% of respondents actually quit the interaction that they were doing because they were frustrated by capture. Now, when I say that number, people go, well, that's okay, but to me, the more alarming point is that 40% that when we extrapolated the data was for customers going to things like banking websites, medical websites. I don't know about you, but I can't just change my bank or go fill out a doctor's forms or appointments to a different doctor very quickly, right? Like I can from a retail perspective. So it's not just retail that it impacts, but it's other areas as well where people really have a poor customer experience and are being impacted by that. So I have many other stories, but just in the interest of time, I just wanted to touch on that, you know, that you've got to look at it from a digital transformation perspective where it impacts 3 different areas and impacts the whole business, not just necessarily one area of the business.
Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of a theme in some of the answers that you all just gave, and it's about this cross-department impact for, you know, what traditionally people think like, oh, the fraud team handles fraud, and maybe back in the day that was the case, but certainly there's been a shift. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration and inter-team, you know, conversations. So Diana, let's just chat about what is it like at the finish line? Is it all you having great conversations with yourself, or is there some collaboration going on there?
There is definitely a lot of collaboration here. That's one of my main goals in any organization and on any company I've worked for. Cross-department collaboration is definitely something I always focus on, and I started that from the day one, not just for bots, not just for fraud, but overall risk management. And I think it's extremely important because I think, like Gavin said, marketing may be running a promotion, but they don't know that they're sending this to customers that do not exist. I think we just recently had like a news about certain payment providers provider who had multiple fake accounts created and how much that cost them. And I'm sure that every organization has them. What I saw in the past, and this is why I'm focusing so much on cross-department collaboration. I saw in the past this acceptance of out of sight, out of mind approach with many organizations when it comes to risk and fraud. And I think, unfortunately, there are many organizations out there that are still taking this approach, and they do not actually take into the account all of the costs and all of the losses that they occur because of this and because of the lack of cross-department collaboration. And going back to the entire life cycle of transaction, the entire customer journey on our site, that requires other teams to participate in these efforts that our fraud and risk team are kind of leading. So I am very, very focused in that. In our organizations, we have monthly meetings, we share information. If there is new initiative, new project, I definitely do kind of insert myself, but I think I'm very persistent and you could say very aggressive. I try to make sure I get the information I need to get my job done, but I am pretty fortunate to have very good team and very good response. But again, if you are going to look at this holistically, and if you are going to, you may stop the bot at the account create or at the account login, but you will not stop them at the transactional level, or you will not stop them at the refund fraud, and so on. So you have to take this holistic approach and get the information, collaborate with others to make sure that you are successful and that you work towards the same goal.
Perfect. Okay, so let's do a speed round related to this. So Darren, and then Gavin, and then Angel. Who do you see coming to the table now for the bot discussions, in your customers? So who do you see showing up for these discussions now? Darren, let's start with you.
So because this is a business problem with so many stakeholders, like Diana mentioned, you have marketing, communications, and the budget. Wherever the budget is coming from, they're going to want a seat at the table. You might have inventory management. I think Angel mentioned that, where when you have a huge release and you know that there's going to be bot activity that you're going to stop, but maybe the inventory needs to be managed differently during those periods. The operational team needs to be involved, and there might be customer service who needs to be in the loop about what events are happening, what you're doing, and kind of the impact downstream that they should expect to hear from customers about. And I'd say that all of that combined is whenever there's kind of defensive bot activity. But when you have a good bot maybe, and everyone needs to be involved and aligned on that as well. What if it's the end of season and you're trying to get rid of inventory, and a reseller who's coming on and buying the last 1,000 SKUs, you're happy with that you're cleaning out the inventory. Everyone should be aligned. Don't touch that bot. Let it happen.
Interesting. All right, Gavin, how about you? Are you seeing same players, different players?
Similar. What we see is really, I suppose, three camps, and it's unfortunate that the three camps don't really talk to each other. There's the marketing team, which I had mentioned earlier. In fact, what we found was, a quarter of databases that marketing teams are marketing to have either been manipulated or are fraudulent in some way, shape, or form from bots. The other camp is definitely the cybersecurity team. They're concerned about account creations, credential stuffing, all of that. And then the other is the fraud fighters. It's unfortunate, though, that we never get all three teams talking about or working together to try and solve for the same problem. And frankly, like we've spoken about here, it's more a business problem that impacts the entire business. Generally, what we see is two, never three, but one of the two of the groups usually are collaborating together, and then we say, have you spoken to the fraud fighters or cybersecurity team or the infrastructure team? Because a lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, the infrastructure costs. A lot of people don't think about that. So it's really those three groups that should be collaborating more to solve for the business problem of how do you address bots.
All right, Angel, same thing? Same people, different?
I echo what Darren and Gavin said about those teams there. But one other aspect to this is the line of business owners, and more importantly, if you have multiple channels that your customers can engage engaged with to make sure that they're connecting. Because as we mentioned earlier, criminals aren't just looking for vulnerabilities in your application. They're looking for vulnerabilities in your organization, your processes, your people. And a lot of times we're seeing one channel being targeted to go after the other. They'll call into your call center, your customer support, to do a password change or change a shipping address for the merchandise that they're about to order online. Or, the example I gave before about, the scams we saw people buying online, pick up at store that spiked during COVID because they were repurposing their mules. So it's incredibly important that you look at this from an omni-channel, cross-channel perspective and link in your cybersecurity strategy within that group and work with those line of business owners in that as well.
Yeah, I remember in Vegas, when I was giving results about the annual survey, one of the things that one of my presenters from Microsoft said is he's in the business of making friends. So that he spends a lot of time building bridges and inviting people from other departments.
Yes,
right.
opportunities to collaborate. We should too, right?
Listen, if you think they're not running their own virtual event right now on how to take all of you down, they absolutely are. They just don't charge they don't charge the ticket prices. They make you do gift cards for certain stores, I guess. All right. So we are down to our 4-minute mark. So I think in order to round us out today, I'm going to go through the panel. We'll end with Diana. But what I'd like to know is what is your 60-second best practice? So if someone is looking at bots and maybe they're early in their career, or maybe they're even sophisticated, what would you say is your best practice for how to start a conversation around this? So let's start with Gavin.
Good question. So really just going back to the point on bots are a business problem, and at the end of the day, you want to get closer and better serve your customers. So let's stop punishing your customers and let's start, I'll use the word, punishing adversaries and those that are using sophisticated bots by creating friction for those respective sophisticated bots instead of creating friction for your customers.
Perfect. Angel?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that bots are really the prelude to the kiss, right? They're means to an end. So when you're looking at bots, really think about how you can block the bots upstream so you can reduce fraud downstream and neutralize things like account takeover. They're usually a means to an end, a tactic that cyber criminals are taking. So look at it holistically on what you think they're trying to achieve and create your strategy around that.
Perfect. Darren?
I echo kind of both Angel and Gavin. I think the business problem, you need to have a clear understanding of what you're trying to solve, and build a multi-layered approach. So you're going to have bot activity throughout the business, and you need to have maybe a moat around your castle, but within the castle there might be rooms holding special keys, special jewels, whatever. You might want to have extra security there who also is able to recognize when the king comes in and just let the king in without any friction. So you need a multi-layered approach, know when to apply friction, and make sure that your good customers have the best experience possible.
It sounds like a total art versus science thing. Diana, take us home on the merchant perspective. Give me the best practices.
Absolutely. I just want to say, if you think you don't have bots, you're just probably not tracking them and not identifying them well. You definitely have them at some aspect of your business in some point in that transaction or customer journey. I do need to say again, you need to align with your business. Darren mentioned this earlier. You make sure that you know what you're stopping and you know what demon you're fighting in order to fight it more successfully. And again, multi-layered approach, I think that's definitely success right now. As everything in fraud, you're going to have a lot of people coming back to you and tell you that they have this silver bullet, they resolved all the problems, they solved all the problems. Unfortunately for bots, I think it requires that cross-department cooperation and requires multi-layered approach to be successful.
Exactly. Bots are here to stay, as is fraud, so you all have job security, at least from where I'm sitting, for quite some time. So I'm going to round us out. I want to say thank you to the four of you. Like I said, I think we could do an entire day on nothing but bots and talk about them. I can't help but imagine ways in my own head that I could be using them for good. But I guess now that I've said that on the recording, it's out there live, right? So, okay, so with that, I want to thank you all for your attendance today. Please feel free to chat with us, and we will be posting everybody's contact information in the Q&A session if you want to have additional dialogue with any of the panelists today. So with that, enjoy the rest of your day at MRC Virtual.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you there to great speakers from Arvato, Human Security, Riskified, F5 and Finish Line. Take another 5-minute break before hearing the next two sessions. On payments, we have Ravelin and Hugo App talking all things international payments with a focus on LATAM. On fraud, we hear from Priceline and People, who will discuss developing proactive identity verification strategies to prevent account takeover. Enjoy.